Paul Hawke. He's an ecologist with the National Trust, and he's going to tell us a little bit more about the wildlife value of the park.
Yeah, what makes Kedleston Park really special is that it's a really fine example of wood pasture parkland. The National Trust owns a lot of wood pasture parkland sites around the country, usually associated with our large mansion houses. And they are essentially ancient landscapes, and they contain a large number of old trees and pastures that have been grazed pretty much in the same way for a very, very long period of time. And this mixture of habitats of old and younger trees and scrub and grassland, and here at Kedleston with the fine lakes going down the middle which provide an aquatic environment for wildlife as well, you've just got this fantastic mosaic which makes it a very rich place for wildlife.
Is Kedleston recognised in any way as being important for wildlife?
It is. Quite a large part of it, about a third of it, has actually been designated as a site of special scientific interest. And the primary interest for its designation is actually the bugs, the dead wood invertebrates that live in the old decaying trees scattered around the park. And there's a whole community of these bugs that are very specialised, and they're not only found here at Kedleston, but they are associated with trees of a certain age, and those are increasingly scarce away from sites like Kedleston. The designation also covers the lower lake here at Kedleston, and that was primarily for its dragonfly interest, being one of the best sites in the county for dragonflies. Interestingly, the designation doesn't cover the fact that the lakes contain a really important population of white-clawed crayfish, which is a globally threatened species that occurs in the lakes, because these weren't known about until after the designation took place. And it was only in 2000, when the Trust arrived here and we were doing some work on the lakes, that we discovered the presence of the white-clawed crayfish. One of the important features here at Kedleston is the dead wood, either on the trees that are still standing and often still alive, but also people looking around. You may see fallen trees, logs, branches that are just left to decay, and that's really important because the different stages in the invertebrates' life cycles, they require the different stages of decaying wood. And for example, we're stood here next to this incredible tree that fell down obviously in the wilderness area a long time ago, and it's decayed so much that it's actually becoming a part of the ground. You can see it's kind of turning into soil, and there are actually some silver birch trees growing out of the decaying wood. If you were to pull any part of that tree away, any of the bark that's left there, it'll just be a seething mass of bugs. So the bugs are important in their own right because they're scarce, but also obviously they provide food for other animals here too, for other invertebrates, but also particularly the birds at Kedleston, which are a really important feature here as well. So what we do at Kedleston, in order to get the balance right in terms of the amount of dead wood that there is on the ground and keeping the park as a well-presented historic parkland, is that we zone it in terms of visibility. So areas, as visitors drive into the park, they shouldn't see very much in the way of fallen trees or dead wood lying on the ground. We move that away to areas where it can't be seen, so it's tucked away in nooks and crannies and corners so that it can decay quietly without impinging upon the view.
So obviously Kedleston is a historic parkland, and we do lots of conservation of the hall. That's very obvious. Conserving the park for historical features must be important as well. Does that have any effect upon the wildlife that's here?
It doesn't, because what we managed to do here at Kedleston is that we managed to maintain a really clever balance of the two. So the areas that are most important for wildlife happen to be the areas that are designated for SSSI, and we manage those much more lightly than we do the areas in front of the mansion house, for example, where the grass is shorter. The sheep prefer to graze there. So we're able to maintain all the historic features, the presentation and the wildlife in a happy balance here at Kedleston.
Could you tell us a little bit more about wood pasture as a habitat?
Yeah, wood pasture is actually one of the rarest habitats in Europe, and again, in the UK we happen to have quite a lot of it because we have many ancient parklands and mansion houses still left, which have been lost elsewhere in Europe. Here in the wilderness where we're standing at the moment is a really good example of how I would imagine that most of Britain would have looked like, say, 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, when we had large herds of wild cattle, wild horses and red deer that would have been grazing the habitats, and they would have created what is essentially wood pasture. So you would have had, as we have here, where we have tussocky grasslands and short bits of shorter grassland. We have thorn thickets with a hawthorn growing out behind the blackthorn, and then a number of oaks and birch and stuff that have all managed to grow here quite successfully, even though we graze this area with cattle. And the reason this happens is because the number of cattle we put here is low enough to enable this natural cycle to continue, and we what we call natural regeneration. You can see there's a small hawthorn over there that's growing quite happily, even though it's only 3 or 4 years old. That in a more intensively grazed environment, it wouldn't survive. So it's quite amazing how this small corner of Kedleston, which everybody comes here and thinks of as this really highly designed parkland, actually has a fantastic example of the closest you can get to wilderness in this day and age. And Adam, the designer of the landscape here at Kedleston, he had the foresight to incorporate these ancient features into the landscape, which is why we still have so many ancient trees left at Kedleston, and why it's one of the most important sites in the country for its trees and those bugs that I was talking about earlier that live on those trees.